The United States Army sends 2 airborne divisions into occupied France as a part of Operation Neptune on Tuesday, June 6, 1944. One of those divisions is the 101st Airborne Division. The 101st is to capture a series of beach exits and strong points immediately inland from Utah Beach. They will do so on June 6 with 6,928 men.
On D-Day, we took off, and it was just getting dark, and we flew through the night and out over the ocean, back in between the Jersey and Guernsey Islands. Well, by the time we get to Normandy, it was pretty dark early in the morning, really. It was 1:14 in the morning when I parachuted in. And we ran in through a cloud bank, and that's why the airplanes scattered the way they did, and of course they were low to the ground. So when I went out the door, I got the opening shock, and I grabbed the riser and pulled them apart, checked my canopy, and when I looked up the canopy, I saw machine gun tracers going through my canopy, and I hit the ground. So I knew I was dropped about 300 feet off the ground. It was supposed to drop no lower than 7.
I jumped the lowest that I have ever jumped in my life, 350 feet. All I can remember is I looked around and I saw a farmhouse in the distance, and then I landed. And my watch broke at the time, so and it broke around 1:25.
With D-Day, we learned a lot of lessons that you would have thought we would have learned during training exercises. One was equipment. The airborne paratrooper had about 60 pounds of stuff that he jumped with. His Garand was 10 pounds, if that's what he was carrying. And Thompson was almost just as heavy. The carbine wasn't as heavy, but he had a lot of ammunition and a lot of equipment, maybe an extra radio. So you were hitting the ground with quite a payload of inventory on you. And how a lot of that was tied down, a lot of those snapped loose, and you had guys running around trying to find, their guns in the middle of the night.
It came as a little bit of a surprise in the afternoon on D-Day when 105mm howitzer shells began to fall on Utah Beach. The howitzers that were providing that fire were in the hedgerow across the field behind me. And those howitzers were not known to be there before the landings on June 6th. And this is part of the reason why it sent up a big alarm that resulted eventually in elements of the 2nd Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, moving down this road into a cluster of buildings just down here called Grand Shimat. And it was there that the battalion commander ordered a lieutenant by the name of Richard D. Winters to figure out where the guns were. Dick Winters at that time was the acting company commander of E Company 506 because the actual company commander was unaccounted for. Winters conducted a one-man reconnaissance of the position, figured out exactly where the guns were on the hedgerow, came back, quickly organized an assault force, and began a battle that would last well into the afternoon. It would go on for hours. When Winters laid out the plan for his attack, he established a base of fire. He had an assault force that would sweep into the gun positions. But then he also took 2 of his men, Malarkey and Randy, and he positioned them in the tree that you see right about there. And those men climbed the tree, and both of them armed with M1A1 carbines. They were to open fire to provide this element of base of fire that contributed to the other base of fire. And by the time that it was over, the Germans had been driven from the guns and driven from Breakcore Manor entirely. Winters was recognized for the leadership that he exhibited here on D-Day with an award of the Distinguished Service Cross. And that all happened right here.
Behind what we call Utah Beach now, the area was flooded. There were causeways, and literally that's exactly what you think they are. They're elevated roads that run from the beach area to the interior. The Germans had defensively flooded a lot of the area around, so this is not take country. This is not where you can just get off the road and move inland. This is an area where if you're going to move up that causeway, you need to control both sides, both the invasion point and the hubs and towns inland.
The roadway leading from Saint-Côme-du-Mont into the northern outskirts of Carentan in that direction is a roadway that remains very busy to this day, even 75 years after the D-Day invasion. And the house located at the north end of this causeway was ultimately given the nickname Dead Man's Corner. We believe that it was Don Burgett that coined the name. He was the author of Currahee with the Screaming Eagles in Normandy. And the reason that Burgett nicknamed this place Dead Man's Corner was because an M5A1 Stuart light tank was located here. The dead body of the tank commander was hanging out of the tank commander's hatch, thus the name Dead Man's Corner.
As we approached the Dead Man's Corner area, you know, I haven't been in many combat actions, but enough to know that there's a lot of commotion, and then everything is quiet. Colonel Ewell was giving me orders, and I was transmitting them to some observer, somebody somewhere. And finally, I think he got tired of doing that, Colonel Ewell did, and he took the phone himself, and of course I'm sitting there with the radio. And then, I don't know whatever happened, but for some reason I moved off, and a few of us standing around, and then all of a sudden, you know, in comes another shell. That's when I got hit. And of course, I went down in the basement of the house. The basement was all full of Germans. I think I probably was the only American down there. And some German medic, you know, looked at my eye and said, "Nick kaput, not going." And he poured something in my eye. And I can remember I got on a Jeep, there were some other guys and stretchers, whatever, and I was taken to the beach. And then, you know, eventually to England. When I went in the Army, December the 11th, 1942, I was issued an M1 rifle, and I remember the serial number, 987078. That was my rifle. It was made in like September or October, something of, it was Springfield, of 1942. And of course, I cleaned it up. And then the rest of the time I was in the United States, like maneuvers, whatever we did, that rifle was mine. So, you know, we're getting ready to go overseas. They said, "Turn in your rifles, you'll get a new rifle." So, of course, I had been on a range with it and all that business, so, and I was attached to the rifle. So I realized that the gun that I carried into France, I have no idea what it was. All I know is it was a rifle. But that's the Army.
I think it was the best rifle made. Best rifle made, because actually some people say they had a jam at times, and when they did a lot of firefighting, but they didn't jam. Usually what happened, you have the gas operating rod, and of course when your round is going out, it forces gas down the port and it comes back. Well, right at the end, just before it goes into the breech, it comes up on a 90 degree. And hammering back and forth, eventually, if there's any stoppage at all in an M1, that breaks. And of course, if you're in heavy combat, you don't have time to examine it, and if you did, it's no good anyway. But that's what happens, and a lot of people say, well, it jammed, it won't fire, and they get another one. You know, somebody wounded or dead. But the M1 would function.